What if the story of creation as we know it isn't actually the beginning? What if the Garden of Eden was built on the ruins of a forgotten, catastrophic war? Okay, let's dive right into this. So, right out of the gate, the very first lines of the Bible present us with a huge puzzle. Verse 1 is perfect, clear creation. But then you hit that one word, but. It immediately signals a contradiction. Why would a perfect creation suddenly become a chaotic, empty wasteland? You see, you've got this really jarring contrast. On one hand, a deliberate, perfect act of creation, and on the other, an immediate state of total ruin and darkness. This doesn't sound like a work in progress. It reads a whole lot more like the aftermath of some kind of disaster. Now, this is where it gets really interesting if you look at the original Hebrew. The phrase without form and void is tohu bohu. And when you see that exact phrase used elsewhere in the Bible, like in Isaiah and Jeremiah, it always describes a land that has been utterly destroyed by God's judgment. It doesn't mean raw potential or blank canvas. It means wreckage. And this is what brings us to what's famously called the gap theory. It basically proposes that the space between those two verses isn't just a pause. It's a gap that could represent millions, maybe even billions of years. A period of time that holds the hidden story of a forgotten world and the judgment that wiped it out. And this isn't some brand new idea. Some really ancient Jewish traditions, like the Midrash Rabbah, talk about this. They speak of God creating and then destroying previous worlds because they had become corrupted. It suggests there's always been this ancient understanding of a history that happened before our own. So the big question is, if there was a catastrophic judgment, what caused it? Well, this theory points to a prime suspect, the original rebellion in heaven. Is it possible that the tohu bohu, the ruin we read about, is the physical fallout from that cosmic war that saw Lucifer cast down to earth? This, of course, leads to another huge question. If a world existed before Adam, who or what was living in it? Well, the Bible gives us a really fascinating clue about who was around at the very, very beginning. Check this out. In the book of Job, God himself is talking, and he asks Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were being laid. And he says at that moment, all the sons of God shouted for joy. So these beings were present. They were witnesses to creation. So wait a minute. This raises a massive question. If Adam was the very first man created from the dust of the earth later on, then who exactly were these sons of God who were already there, watching the whole thing unfold? Well, the term in Hebrew, B'nai HaElohim, is usually understood to mean heavenly beings, angels. The ancient, non-biblical book of Enoch actually gives them a specific name, the Watchers. And according to that text, they weren't originally evil. They were an elite class of angels sent to guard and oversee the early earth. But here's where it all went terribly wrong. This guardianship turned into a full-blown rebellion. They abandoned their mission, they took human wives, and they started teaching humanity forbidden secrets, things like making weapons and casting spells. And this unholy union produced an entirely new, completely unnatural race, the Nephilim. And we need to be clear here, the creation of these beings wasn't just a minor slip-up. It was an act of cosmic warfare. It was a direct attempt to corrupt God's creation from the inside out. The name Nephilim itself is a dead giveaway. It comes from the Hebrew root word nepal, which means to fall. They were quite literally the fallen ones. And they weren't just giants in size, they were fallen in nature, a hybrid species, part heavenly, part earthly, that was never supposed to exist. And their impact on the world was absolutely devastating. They filled the earth with a very specific kind of violence the Bible calls chamos, just total lawlessness and chaos. Their very existence was an attack on humanity's genetic code. It was a strategic attempt to corrupt the human bloodline so thoroughly that a redeemer could never be born from it. Now, this reframes the entire story of Noah. When the Bible says he was perfect in his generations, the Hebrew word there is tamim. That's the exact same word used to describe a spotless, unblemished animal for a sacrifice. The implication is shocking. Noah and his family may have been chosen not just because they were moral, but because their bloodline, their DNA, was still pure, untouched by this Nephilim corruption. And just when you think, okay, so the flood solved the problem, Genesis drops this absolutely chilling line. The Nephilim were on the earth before the flood, and also afterward.
This hints that even the ultimate reset button, the Great Flood, might not have been the final solution to the problem.
So if the flood didn't fix everything, what was it really for? Well, according to this theory, it wasn't just a punishment. It was a strategic, divine intervention. Think of it less like a demolition and more like cosmic surgery, meant to save humanity from being totally corrupted.
And just listen to the language God uses here. It's not just anger, it's grief. It's the pain of a creator watching his beautiful masterpiece being twisted and deformed into something he never intended. This wasn't a tantrum, it was a heartbreaking necessity.
So the whole perspective shifts. Instead of seeing the flood as simply a punishment for bad behavior, this theory frames it as a desperate, last-ditch effort to preserve the pure human genome and contain a hybrid race that was threatening to literally consume the world. And in that light, the Ark becomes something so much more profound. It wasn't just a big boat, it was a genetic time capsule. Its primary purpose was to safeguard the one pure human lineage left on the entire planet, the very bloodline that the future Messiah had to come from. So this entire ancient drama, the fall of the Watchers, the corruption by the Nephilim, the divine reset of the flood, it's all pointing forward. It's all building towards an ultimate resolution, a final answer to a problem that started long before Genesis chapter 1. This idea completely redefines Adam's role. He wasn't placed in a pristine, brand new world. No, he was placed in the aftermath of a war, as a divine countermeasure. His job wasn't just to garden, it was to guard, and to begin the long work of reclaiming a world that had already fallen into darkness. And this is where the whole epic story finally culminates. The first Adam, he failed his mission to guard the garden. But the Bible calls Christ the last Adam. And the contrast is just staggering. Where the first Adam failed, the last Adam succeeded. He didn't just fix Adam's mistake. He came to reverse the entire cosmic fall and reclaim everything that was lost. So when you see history through this lens, it changes everything, doesn't it? It frames our entire existence not as just a simple story of sin and redemption, but as one small part of a massive ongoing cosmic war. And it leaves us with one final powerful question to think about. If this war isn't over, then what is our role in its final decisive chapter?